So we have Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited. This comes out in 1965. Bob Dylan, one of the greatest artists of all time. Just in his discography, he's released 4 or 5 of the all-time great albums. So why specifically this album out of his amazing discography? I mean, you could easily choose 3, 4, 5 other ones, and they hold up.
I mean, Blonde on Blonde, Blood on the Tracks, Time Out of Mind, 1977. I still say the greatest comeback album of all time. To me, that album it's as if Wayne Gretzky came out of retirement this season and scored 100 goals. I think everything came together on Highway 61. Bring it all back home. The previous album was the first electric album, but the acoustic side was better than the electric side. This was all electric. I read a thing about I read a quote by Phil Ramone, who produced Blood on the Tracks, and he said, yeah, the thing about claiming to produce Bob Dylan, you don't really produce Bob Dylan. Like, producing Bob Dylan means you press record all the time, because Dylan doesn't care. He gets in the studio, he sings his songs. It doesn't matter who's with him. But they've got to be good, because he's going to change everything. He's going to I'm going to wait 4 bars instead of 2 bars between these verses, and you got to be on your toes. I read this amazing thing about his gospel period. He made Slow Train Coming, and then he made 2 more records. The next record, I believe, was Shot of Love. Same producer, same musician, same studio, but Shot of Love sounds terrible. Slow Train Coming sounds amazing. It sounds like a Steely Dan album. Apparently, he went to the mixing and said, "What are you doing?" And the producer said, "Well, we're mixing." And he said, "Why does it sound so clean?" The producer said, "Well, that's what we do. We clean up the tracks, we make them nicer, and then we mix it." He said, "Well, what did you play me last week?" He said, "Those were the rough mixes. That's what I want."
And that's what he went with.
No one does that. So this was, like you said, released August 30th, 1965. The sessions ended on August 25th. It's just, you don't have to, obviously I wasn't around in 1965 to hear this when it was released, but it doesn't matter when you listen to this, you can hear that it's going somewhere that no one's ever gone before. There's a sense of chaos in so many songs, like something's about to blow up, and sometimes you think it would be a sort of unbearable ecstasy to be one of the session players, because you're doing something so amazing, and you're only going to get 2 or 3 takes, or 1 take, and you better make it count. And they all count. I mean, I've regularly covered 6 of these songs, and the sonic space is unbelievable. A song just like Tom Thumb's Blues, it's got in the center, slightly left, it's got this electric guitar played by Mike Bloomfield. On the left is a vibrato Hofner electric piano, and on the right is what's called a tack piano, when you put things on the piano strings to be. It's like a old barrel house Western, and it all comes together in this beautiful. And then the snare hits, and the snare sound on the entire record is just like the sound of God. It's just, I think it's in 1965, it was hard to go into a good studio and make something bad. All the gear was great. I think that was kind of the peak of the, people weren't really messing with things. They were just trying to document things, but it got to the point where it was more than just a document. And it was before, when you were deliberately trying to mess with things and start doing effects. And so I don't know, it just all, you know, it's like people say about recording Dylan, it's catching lightning in a bottle.
It's just capturing magic and trying to get like a kind of an audio timestamp of the performance essentially,
Yeah.
instead of all the editing and manipulating later on that we do here with technology.
And this was, and maybe the sound of chaos comes from the fact that this was his third album in 18 months. He'd been on the road constantly. He was probably doing way too much amphetamine, probably drinking too much and smoking tons of weed. And you know, he basically took himself out after this album. It was too much, and you can hear it. But at the same time, he's just at the top of his form. And which brings me to the next thing. You know, I don't know what I hate worse, when people, if you're a musician or a music lover, you can't say no, I don't like Bob Dylan. You can't do it. So I don't know what's worth, people that say, oh, I can't stand Bob Dylan, or people that say, oh, I respect him and he's a great writer, but I can't listen to his voice. You listen to the beginning of Desolation Row and you tell me this guy can't sing. I think it was Jeff Tweedy from Wilco that said, you'll never find a singer who thinks Bob Dylan is a bad singer. I mean, there's it's hard to overestimate Bob Dylan. I would say calling him the greatest songwriter in history is underselling him a bit.
Wow.
And calling him a great lyric writer, you know, he's got a chip on his shoulder about that, and he should, because it means, oh, so I can't sing, I'm not a melodicist, I can't write songs, I'm just good for words. I mean, his phrasing wise, his peers are Miles Davis and Frank Sinatra. He's I without irony, I call him the greatest singer of our generation.
Yeah, I think I've heard Dave Grohl say that if you have a voice, the most important thing is that you have something to say and that you're unique and distinct. So with Bob Dylan, it's like, no, he doesn't have, you know, like the typical beautiful like Mariah Carey voice or whatever, but it's like he has the voice he was given, and you know it's Bob Dylan, and he uses it masterfully for what it is and for his craft.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you know, things don't exist in a vacuum. You know, you put together amazing lyrics, amazing songs, an amazing band, amazing equipment, and an amazing singer, you're going to come up with Highway 61.
You were saying that he's quite possibly the greatest songwriter of all time. If he is not the greatest songwriter of all time, who's in the running? I guess it would be Lennon, McCartney, maybe Neil Young. Like who's in the Mount Rushmore with Bob Dylan?
Chris Christopherson, I would say. Leonard Cohen. It depends. You know, some are great lyricists, some are great, you know, Sting is a great melodicist, but that's about it. You know, McCartney is a great melodicist. Dylan's the whole package.
Do you remember the first time that you really got into Bob Dylan's music? I mean, the music was out there, but at what point did it really stand out to you?
Yeah, I didn't hear much of it at all growing up. I was introduced to it by the first friend I made in first year university at Queens in Kingston, and it was probably Greatest Hits Volume 2. And then from there I just got into a wormhole. My friend had a lot of I don't think I heard Highway 61 at that point. I was mostly into the early acoustic ones. And the thing I remember most often, I was going to ask you earlier, cussing is okay, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I got asked that last interview. Hey, if you need to cuss to properly get across the emotions that, you know, go ahead.
So I remember so vividly listening to something from, let's say, Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll from Times Are Changing, and lifting the needle going, what the fuck did he just say? I have to hear that again. What is that? Can that be what he said?
It was just so different or
It was just
shocking or
so
beautiful.
intense and arresting.
So for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with that album yet, that's the best part of this whole series is people going out and getting 5 great albums at a time to dive into. So the 4 singles were Like a Rolling Stone, which is the Bob Dylan song everyone knows, From a Buick 6, Highway 61 Revisited, and Queen Jane Approximately. Yeah, this album, it's one of the most acclaimed albums of all time. There's the famous Rolling Stone list, 500 greatest albums of all time. This is at number 4. Like of all the albums in human history, it's in the top 5 to show just how incredible it is.
Yeah, and I mean, the calling songs singles is kind of irrelevant to me, and they're just all so incredible in their own way. Desolation Row, I don't know,
That's the final song, right? And it's
13
like
or 14
11
or
minutes.
15 minutes. Dylan's playing an acoustic guitar, someone else is playing acoustic guitar, fills perfectly. The harmonica solo at the end is like stupidly too loud, but you wouldn't want it any less loud. It just kind of makes your head explode. It's kind of this, he just sings and sings and sings, and then the harmonica is this incredible release valve that just blows the top of your head off. From a Buick 6 just has this that chaotic sound. It just sounds like it's falling apart. Al Cooper's doing this organ fill that just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. It just and it's funny too. What's the line in Buick 6? She don't make me nervous. She don't talk too much. She walks like Bo Diddley, and she don't need no crutch. She keeps this 410 all loaded with lead. I think when I was thinking about these 5 albums, there's a sense of humor running through all of them.
I was gonna say that with it was either Steely Dan or the let's see, what are the Joe Walsh. One of those two had some comedy stuff going on in there, or at least a sense of humor.
Yeah, but also a deadly serious at the same time, which I think is a lot of what I love about music.
I love that Bob Dylan isn't in a rush. Like songs like a Rolling Stone and Desolation Row. It's like it's going to take as long as it needs to take to get his point across.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing when you have these, when you move from like 3 verses in a bridge to like 6 verses, 7 verses, 8 verses, they're constructed so well. Bob Dylan's a great storyteller, and you start to see patterns, and the finishing. It's always the most intense lines in the finishing verse.
Yeah, let me know if I'm incorrect with the following statement, but my understanding is before Bob Dylan, lyrics and music were like, tutti frutti all a Rudy, like they meant nothing. It was just something had to come out. There was a melody and here's a few words, and it's like, I don't know, we dance to this and it feels good. And my understanding is Bob Dylan is where it's like lyrics became actual, of the utmost importance, and telling a story, and he becomes the voice of a generation because there's something we're saying. Is that accurate, or am I off?
I think that's quite accurate. David Crosby said when the Byrds one of their first singles was Mr. Tambourine Man, and he said that was the first time poetry was on the radio.
Wow. Okay, I have a story here. You mentioned that Bob Dylan, he was just touring constantly. He just putting out so many albums that he was kind of burning out. So there's a quick story about him getting burnt out just before the writing of Like a Rolling Stone. I thought you would enjoy. So it says here, in May of 1965, Dylan returned from his tour of England feeling exhausted and dissatisfied with his material. He told journalist Nat Hentoff, "I was going to quit singing. I was very drained. It's very tiring having other people tell you how much they dig you if you don't dig yourself. Then he says, as a consequence of his dissatisfaction, Dylan wrote 20 pages of verse he later described as a long piece of vomit. He reduced this to a song with 4 verses and a chorus, which became Like a Rolling Stone. He told Hentoff that writing and recording the song washed away his dissatisfaction and restored his enthusiasm for creating music. Describing the experience, Dylan said, it's like a ghost is writing a song like that. You don't know what it means, except the ghost picked me to write that song. So that's Like a Rolling Stone. Crazy, eh? He just writes 20 pages and narrows it down to essentially the greatest song of all time.
Well, and the further background of that is on that tour of the UK, he was getting booed every night. Like everyone, the 80% of the crowd was booing him and yelling at him during the Electric set. And you know, who else could say, I don't care what you think, I'm going to keep doing this
until they come around.
Yeah.
It's wild. I watched the movie. I think it was No Direction Home. It's like 3.5 hours. Like, it's so long. I started and I didn't realize how long and intense it was. But man, that paints a picture of him going through that phase of going from the electric or the acoustic to electric, and all the backlash and people throwing stuff and walking out. And you think to today, where there's so many styles of music and artists are known for going across genres, and it's all normal now. And you think of what Bob Dylan went through, and you think of today, and it's like, that stuff never happens today. It's all accepted. And I guess a part of it is he was kind of the genius ahead of his time that had to, you know, take the brunt of I guess working in crowds to expect that and be okay with it. And we benefit from that now as musicians.
Well, yeah, he invented everything. You know, he invented country rock, you could say. He invented folk rock. He put Tin Pan Alley out of business. Before Dylan, no one's sang their own songs. Everyone, like, there were songwriters and there were singers. And after Dylan, it was like, oh, we got to be like Dylan. We got to write our own songs.
So Like a Rolling Stone comes out, top 10 hit in a bunch of different countries. I mentioned Rolling Stone with the 500 greatest albums of all time. They also had the 500 greatest songs of all time, Like a Rolling Stone, top 5 again. He had 2 other songs from this album on that list. So Desolation Row and Highway 61 Revisited. They were number 187 and 373. So he has, just from one album, not his entire discography, from one album, 3 of the greatest songs of all time. I think there's only like 8 songs on the album as well, right? It's a shorter album.
9 songs, yeah.
9 songs. Okay. Another song that stood out to me was Ballad of a Thin Man. Just, there's such like a groove and like a pocket and intensity. There's like attitude. I can like feel attitude while I'm listening to this.
And he it's another, you know, Dylan just doesn't follow rules. You know, when I'm producing, I remember working on a song with someone and saying, like, no, your chorus has to come up and your chorus can't come down and register. And that's what he does on Ballad of the Thin Man. He goes up and up and up in the verse, and then he brings it down. And it's like, you're not allowed to do that. But if you're Dylan, you don't have to follow any rules, because you're making up new rules as you go along.
They apparently, him naming the album Highway 61 Revisited, I don't know why, but the label didn't like it. And it's like he wanted to name it that, and whoever at the lower end of the label spectrum was like, no, we can't do that. So he goes someone higher, and apparently he fought all the way up to the top. And at the top, they're like, just let him fucking name it whatever he wants. And it's like a famous story with the album. I mean, who, it's not like that's a ridiculous name of an album. It's not something, you know, someone else, Alf Annabellini of Envy of None, he had in his top 5, he had an album by Sparkle Horse. And the name of the album is like Viva Dixie Marine Submarine. It's literally like the entire alphabet. So anyways, Bob Dylan, you know, Highway 61 Revisited, that's like a nice title, but
well,
label people,
weird. Like, you got to remember, Pet Sounds, Beach Boys, they wouldn't let him call the song Hang On to Your Ego. He had to change it to I Know There's an Answer. He said, oh, people can't handle that.
It's wild.
It was olden times.
Did you ever get to see Bob Dylan live?
Once I saw him, the Tempest tour. I was just talking to Colin Linden about this. He was playing with Dylan the summer before I saw that tour, and it was one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen. It sounded perfect. I was in the nosebleeds at the I don't know if it's still called the Sony Center, the old Opera House in Toronto, and it was mind blowing. I know this guy from he's an old folk guy, and in the most humble way, he told me, we were talking about the show, and he said, well, I'm not going to get into it, but I'm on the list for every Dylan show, so I go to every show. He said, maybe if it's the Sky Dome, I don't go to that show. And he said, and that one was top 5.
Wow.
So I got lucky. It was one of those shows where I wish it could have gone on for 12 hours, because I was never not in awe of it. I could have just gone on listening to every little detail forever.
He had you captivated.
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear that, some of the later shows, closer to now, apparently like his voice isn't holding up so great. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it's awesome to hear that the show you were at, everything was just incredible.
It was definitely the late period voice, but I remember it as he sounded a little better than on the last album, the album that he was touring. It was just, it was stunning.
So I've seen that in the past, you've actually done gigs where you were covering the entire Blood on the Tracks album from Bob Dylan. Is that true? And if so, yeah, will you ever bring that back where we can come out and see a full Bob Dylan album perform?
Yeah, I'm hoping to do it in the fall here in Sault Ste. Marie with a local stand-up bass player named Jay Case, who's kind of like a legend around here. Just the two of us, with open tuning acoustic and a stand-up bass.
That would be amazing. I got to get out to Sault Ste. Marie. How far is that from Ottawa? Any idea?
9.5 hours.
So you're saying there's a chance. It is possible to physically get there. I have just 2 reviews. So some great reviews that came out about the album, and then we can move on to the next album. So first review. So Michael Gray calls Highway 61 revolutionary and stunning, not just for its energy and panache, but in its vision, fusing radical electrical music with lyrics that were light years ahead of anyone else's. Dylan here unites the force of blues-based rock and roll with the power of poetry, the whole rock culture, the whole post-Beatle pop rock world. And so in an important sense, the 1960s actually started here with this album. So that's one quote. And then the other one is music journalist Gary Graff points to Highway 61 Revisited along with Dylan's next album, Blonde on Blonde, and the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds as possible starting points to the album era, as they each constituted a cohesive and conceptual body of work rather than just some hit singles with filler tracks. So that's what you're saying. Suddenly there's artists that have a whole album's worth of songs.
No, that's absolutely true. There's not many albums before 1965 that are notable. That I would say the early Stones albums are pretty awesome. I wouldn't say that about the early Beatles albums. Even the Kinks, they kind of started their run of great albums in 1965. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how it was the music industry. It was a singles thing, and then you have artists like the Beatles and Bob Dylan that have a full album's worth of music. And hey, a label can make more money selling an album than it can singles. And we went as with an album kind of business model for a long time. And then when the illegal downloading and the Napsters and now the streaming, it seems like we're kind of more back in a singles world. Do you see it that way as well? Like we just came back to what it was pre-Beatles and Dylan?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know if I think there's still people that are into albums. I think part of it is it's just a shrinking audience for music in general. So I think there's always a core section of people that are really into music, and those people are always going to be into albums. And the music business is in rough shape right now, so people aren't there's not as many great records being made, and that's part of the, it keeps eating itself. And so I think young people are listening to old albums and realizing, wow, these are great. Like you'd be crazy not to listen to this whole thing.